Hello! So this is just a quick introduction to the basic features in AutoCAD. We're going to go through some stuff like how to input commands. There's actually two different ways to input commands. You can either click on buttons up at the top in the ribbon, or you can type commands into the command line down along the bottom of the screen. We'll also go through some different ways to zoom, pan, and rotate around objects using either the ViewCube or navigation bars. You can also navigate using your mouse button. Be sure and get a mouse that has one of those rolling buttons in the middle, because otherwise you'll be fighting with some of the view tools in here. We'll also go through understanding how to use some of the snapping features for snapping to grids, snapping to angles, snapping to objects. So a lot of different snapping features that we'll go through in here. And also just how to customize your work area. So you can move buttons and panels around, have different color schemes, different sizes of coordinate systems and grids, just a lot of different customizations that they let you to do. We'll go through dynamic input and also just using some of the AutoCAD help features that come in so nice. Okay, so first things first, let's go through the different types of files that AutoCAD has. And the two main files are DWG, so that's going to be the extension that you save things with, and that's a drawing file. There's also DWTs, which is a template file. And the templates files save your workspace. Your workspace consists of like your layers and blocks and title blocks and printing layouts and just all of the customizations that you do for your work area. Whereas the drawing files, that's the actual thing that you're drawing on there. Now, under Start Drawing, there's a couple different default templates, and you can save your own custom templates too, but start out with just the default generic templates that AutoCAD gives you. So just click on the arrow and you'll see a bunch of templates listed. If you hover over any of these templates with your cursor and just let your cursor sit there for a little bit, it'll pop up with a description of what that template does. And you're going to want to pay attention to the units on here, because one of the things the templates do is define units. So when you type in a length of 3, is that 3 feet, 3 inches, 3 centimeters, 3 miles? And you can go through and redefine the units later, but it's a lot easier if you just start out with the right template file for the units you're using. So go ahead and just start with a generic English template. Go ahead and click on this. And then once you get into your drawing area, you have a couple different options for saving your work. So you can save your work as a template or as a drawing. Okay, so this is the screen you'll get when you first open up AutoCAD, and there's a couple different things to notice on here. So of course this big black area, and they give you grid and everything, this is where you're going to draw. You've got a coordinate system down here in the lower left hand corner, and you can move this around. We'll talk about that's a UCS, user coordinate system. Also, to see on here, up here at the top, you can have multiple files open at the same time, and sometimes it is convenient to go back and forth between parts to make sure they're fitting into one another. So you can have multiple drawings open and they will show up as tabs up here. You also have your Start tab, so that original screen we were on that allow you to open up different templates, that's over here, and you can access that very easily. Down at the bottom, there's a few tabs too. The Model tab, this first one, and this is where you want to do all of your drawing in. So that's what we see right now up with the black background. The layouts over here, we'll get into that when we start doing dimensioning and looking at the different orthographic views of things. And this is for when you want to print it out onto like a piece of paper. So whether you're using a giant plotter or just your regular old computer printer, this is where we're going to format it and scale everything so that it fits correctly onto a piece of paper with title blocks and stuff like that. Okay, so how are we going to put commands into this thing and tell it what to draw? Down here at the bottom is the command line, and if you don't see this command line, just hit Control 9, or like if you accidentally hit the X and exit out of it, just Control 9 and that will get it back up there. This is the old-fashioned way of entering commands, and it's almost like a programming language. You have to know what to type in for lines and circles. It's pretty straightforward. Rectangle is REC, and there's all these little shortcuts, but all of the older people who are using CAD, they'll use the command line. I think the command line is really the faster way to do it still, but you have to kind of learn the shortcuts and the coding for everything. But this is how AutoCAD's going to communicate. So if AutoCAD needs information from you, it's going to ask you questions, and you're going to answer questions in here by just typing in this little commands line. The other way to input commands is, and this is the new feature, and this is how a lot of the other CAD software works now, is they put all the tools up here in what's called the ribbon. So you can see there's drawing tools with lines, polylines, circles. Each one of these little shapes has a pull down menu with multiple ways that you can define that circle, or multiple ways to define an arc. So just explore some of these tools in here. Here's the modify tools. So if you want to move something around or copy something, mirror it. Annotation, so this is where you're going to add dimensioning and text. We'll do more of this when we get into the layouts. Layers, this is a great way to organize your work. Over here, when you're defining line types, always keep this set to defining it by layer, and we'll go through how to organize your work with that. Groups, utilities. This kind of goes in order. The most used tools are over here on the left-hand side, and it's just like reading left to right. So take some time and go through each of these guys. If you hover your cursor over any of these tools, it'll come up with a description of what it is. And if you keep hovering for a longer and a longer period of time, it'll come up with a larger and a larger, more descriptive thing. Or up here, this is also where you can type in and get help with anything that you need. Okay, so here's just an example of some of the code that you might be typing into the command line. So this right here drew this bicycle here, and you're seeing more than one line of code because we've expanded over here. You really don't want to clutter up your drawing area. So by default, you're only going to see one command line, but everything you've done in there, if you want to kind of scroll through what's happened, you can just hit this little arrow and it'll show you more than one line. So AutoCAD starts with asking you for a command, and you can enter that command. Either I could have typed circle into the command line, so if I just type it in here, that'll start the circle command, or I could click this button, and if you click the buttons, it will fill the code in for you. So as you click buttons, keep an eye out on this command line, and you can see what commands are being generated as you click buttons up here. So you click on the circle, but of course AutoCAD isn't very smart, and just telling it to draw a circle, that's not good enough. So it's going to start asking you questions, right? So it says, well, where's the center of your circle? So you have to put in the X, Y coordinates of your center. And this is the coordinates with respect to your coordinate system over here. And then it says, well, what's the radius of your circle? Or maybe instead of defining a radius, you want to define the diameter of a circle. So there's all these different ways to define everything that you're drawing. And you're just going to have to start reading everything that the command line is asking you for. Okay, so let's just look a little bit more closely at the commands that are being typed in and used in the command line here. So what I've done is highlighted in yellow everything that you type in. And then everything that is not highlighted, this is the questions that AutoCAD is asking you. Couple different notes here. When you're typing commands in, you don't actually have to type the entire word. There's these little shortcuts. So instead of typing circle, you could have just typed CIR. And this is one of the things that makes using the command line a lot faster than poking around and trying to find the right button up here. When you learn all these little truncated shortcuts, it gets pretty fast to type in commands. Now, there's a couple different ways to define objects. So we tell it we want a circle, and then it starts asking for information. What is the center point for the circle? But there's a different way to define a circle, right? We could have defined a circle by making it go through 3 points or through 2 points, or maybe we want to create a circle that's tangent to something. So there's all these different options for creating something. And it's going to go to the most commonly used option first. But if we want to define it differently, we could click on anything here in the square brackets, and that will allow us to define our object differently. All of these objects also show up in your ribbon. So if I pull down this little menu underneath circle, it's going to open up all of those different options for how we could define something. So if you want kind of some more detailed explanations for what those are, just pull the menu down and look through the different options. And then if you want to use one in the command line, you just click on what you want to use, or I could type in 3p if I wanted to do 3 points, or I could type in tan if I wanted to define it by tangent. So either just click on objects in here or type in those different ways to define something. Okay, another little shortcut here. So there's the different options here in square brackets, and there's also a little hint of what AutoCAD thinks that you should do. So maybe before I defined what the radius is, and CAD says, oh, maybe they're going to use the same radius again. And so they put this little guess in these types of brackets. And if you just hit enter, hitting enter will do what is in these little triangular brackets. So I don't actually have to type 8 in here. I could just hit enter and it will do what's in these triangular brackets. So that's another little shortcut. If you're doing the same thing, like if I'm drawing line after line or circle after circle, I don't have to type the command in again. I just hit enter and it'll pull up the previous command. So like right here, I didn't type anything in, I just hit enter. And it pulled up the previous command that was done. Or right here, I don't have to define the radius again. I just hit enter and it pulls in what I did before. So you can just hit enter if you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. Okay, let's see. Escape. The escape key is a very important key. This is probably the most used key that you'll be using on your keyboard. When CAD starts up a command like line, it will keep drawing lines and keep drawing lines until you tell it to stop. And you tell it to stop by hitting the escape key. Also, this is a pretty big program, and if it ever gets just caught in a loop or it starts having troubles and you can't get it to stop, just start hitting escape and that'll stop it from whatever loop or trouble it's having. So the escape key is a great key to know. Another thing, if you want to undo something, Control Z will undo it. That's pretty generic. That works for a lot of different programs, not just CAD. So Control Z, or your little undo arrows up here. This is really nice. If you pull down the little arrow next to undo, it'll actually give you a list of everything you've done. And you have the option of not just undoing one command, but undoing 5 commands or 10 commands or however many you want. So this is kind of a nice little refresher of what you've done, and you can grab a whole chunk of stuff to undo all at once if you want to up here. Okay, so let's look at this stuff in the ribbon just a little bit more closely. One of the things I want to show you, if your ribbon does not look like mine, maybe it has smaller buttons or no buttons at all, these are the 3 different options for viewing your ribbon, and this works. Maybe you don't want to use buttons in the ribbon, you just want to use your command line and you don't want to clutter up your work area, so you want to make it a little bit smaller. If you just click on this little arrow, it's going to cycle through these 3 different ways of displaying your ribbon. So try it out, cycle through the different buttons you have here and see which one you like the best. There's a lot of different ways you can customize everything that's on here. Here's what one of those little pull down menus looks like, right? So if I click underneath the circle, it's going to bring up all these different options for different ways to make a circle. And then if I hover my cursor over one of these options, and you have to just leave it there and be patient for a little bit. So just leave your cursor there and it'll pop up with a little explanation of what this option is trying to do. And then if you continue hovering your cursor over there, it will then pop up with a better explanation with a picture, and it even animates the steps for defining a circle. So here's tan, tan, tan. So I want a circle that's tangent to this line, tangent to this line, tangent. So I would click here, 1, and then click here, 2, click here, 3. And all of these options, it's also going to be telling you things in the command line. So you're just going to be reading the command line and entering the information it needs. And each of these little ways to define something, just leave your cursor over it and it'll walk you through how to use each of these. So it's very user friendly. It's very, very nice to use. Okay, a couple more customizations that you can do here. Let's say you find yourself squinting at the computer screen, and this is not good for your eyes. It's not good for you. What you can do is just anywhere here in the drawing area in the black screen, right click. And you can right click on just about anything to get more options. And that's not just an AutoCAD thing. That's what most programs are going to these sorts of tricks. So you right click anywhere on the black screen and it's going to pop up with all of these options. If you go here and click options, you get a menu and you can completely customize your display. So let's say you don't like the dark background. You can change your color scheme. Let's say you want to make your marker sizes a little bit larger so you don't have to squint. So everything that you're going to see you can customize. So just walk through your display, open and save, all of this stuff you can customize. And then once you have it set to what you want, you're going to save this as a template, and then you won't have to redefine it every single time you open up a new file. Okay, let's say you want to customize what tools are in your ribbon and what order they're in. What you do, again, you're going to find a little blank spot in the ribbon where there's no buttons, so right here on the very edge. And if you right click over here at the very edge, it's going to bring up everything that is shown in that window. So if I come over here to show panel tiles, and right now I have everything selected. So when I select draw, that means my drawing tools up here. When I have modify selected, that means modify. If I don't want something in here, maybe I don't know what utilities is and I don't use it. So I'm going to uncheck it, and then it's not going to be in my ribbon anymore. It's not going to be cluttering up. And you probably won't use every single little thing in here. They say most people use just about 5 to 10% of what's in AutoCAD, and it depends on what applications you have, if you're a civil engineer, if you're a mechanical engineer. So you kind of find the tools that you most commonly use, and then everything else you can uncheck and ignore until you need it. If something isn't showing up, if you see buttons in this presentation that are not going on your screen, this is how you get them. You just right click on the edge and then make sure you have everything checked for what you're trying to use over here. Okay, so here's another cool little trick that you can do. You can take tools out of your ribbon and you can click on them and actually drag them into your drawing area. And you just grab it right here at the bottom, somewhere in the gray area, and left click and hold that clicker down and just drag it inside. Now you say, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to clutter up your drawing area by dragging tool panels into here? Well, a couple different reasons. Let's say you find yourself going between the Home tab that has your drawing tools and maybe, I don't know, one of the other View tabs or the Annotate tabs where you have all of your text tools. If you find yourself going back and forth, what you can do is drag the drawing tool panel into here, and then if you switch to a new panel like the Annotate, you'll get all of the new tools out of the Annotate tab, but you'll keep your drawing tools in here, and then you won't have to go switching back and forth between tabs again. So it's just another way that you can customize your work area. Okay, so let's talk about how to navigate around in your drawing area. There's a couple different tools over here to use. One is the ViewCube, and you can grab this ViewCube and click on the corners, the edges, and the faces, and it's going to reorient your drawing object to go with those corners and faces. As well as the ViewCube, you also have this little area with text up here. and you can click on the text. So if you click on the text, you'll open up all of these options, so you can look straight at the top of it, straight at the bottom, left, right. Also, when we get into three-dimensional objects, there's different ways to see the three-dimensional objects. So you can have just the edges showing up in a wireframe view or realistic view, shaded views, see-through X-ray views. So play around with each of these to see and depending on what you're drawing, sometimes you want to see inside of it or you just want to see the outside of it, so these come in handy. There's also, these are your tools. If your ViewCube is not showing up over here, you just click over here and you can have your ViewCube show up. There's also your navigation bar that's going to show up. What you have to realize with this is your drawing area, this is the universe in here. You can draw little microscopic atoms, or you could draw a huge skyscraper. You could draw planetary systems on this. So it's not like, the old-fashioned pieces of paper that you're confined to an 8.5 by 11 sized area to work in. This is an infinitely large area, and it's easy to get lost in here, okay? So let's say you click somewhere accidentally and then everything you're drawing suddenly disappears. You say, where did everything go? Well, you're in some other part of the universe than what you were drawing was in. And in that case, you're going to have to come over here and zoom in to what you were looking at, or pan around and rotate around. So it takes a little bit of getting used to find what you're drawing on and to navigate in this kind of universe in here. Okay, so let's just take a closer look at what's going on over here in this navigation bar. And this has a couple of different options for scrolling around in your drawing area. Okay, so up here at the top, if you click on this, there's a bunch of tools in here, orbit, zoom. So this is another tool panel that you can pull out. Everything in here you can do with a good mouse. And what I mean by a good mouse is not a $100 mouse. It's just a mouse that has a scroll wheel on it. So not just buttons and not what you get with your laptops. Those things are awful. You need a mouse that has a scroll wheel on the middle of it. And you can do everything in here with your mouse. So like all of the tools, if you just hover your cursor over it, it's going to give you a description. So this little hand, that's your pan button. So it's like grabbing your work area with your hand, and then you can pull things to the left or right or up and down. So you can scroll around with your hand. Your zoom button, this little magnifying glass with the arrows over here. And this is really important if you get lost in the universe, right? You drew something and then you went over here and then you can't find what you drew because, you're over at Pluto and what you drew is back on Earth, and you can't, it really is an infinite drawing area. And if you need to recenter and refine what you were drawing, you just come over here and click zoom. You can also type it into the command line. You can say zoom, and then it'll ask you something, and you say all, and it'll take what you're drawing and it'll fill up your screen with it. If you don't want to do that, so you can do that with the navigation bar, you can type it into the command line or that roller button on your mouse. It doesn't just roll, you can click it like a button. So if you click it, double click it to zoom all, click it down and just hold it down, and that turns your cursor into a hand to pan. Or if you click on the mouse roller and hold it while you're also holding the shift key, that will let you open up the orbit command, and this will orbit around what you're doing. And just try it out. Draw something simple. Try it with your mouse. Try it with the buttons over here. And spend a little bit of time getting familiar with how to move things around, how to walk around the object you're drawing. And just, it's worth it to spend some time becoming familiar with everything in the nav bar, with your ViewCube, with the text up here in the upper left-hand corner, because that's, in the long run, that's going to save you time. Okay, so there's still one toolbar on here that we haven't talked about yet, and that's this little guy down here in the lower right-hand corner. So let's just take a closer look at what's going on here. Now we're going to start out with this model button here. If you click on this model button, you're going to go between this grid space where you draw things and your paper space. And we'll get into paper spaces when we talk about layouts and dimensioning. But for now, make sure when you're drawing something, you're going to be drawing everything inside of your model space. Okay, next little bit on here that default comes up. This is your grid. And if you click on it, if it's gray, that's going to turn your grid off. So if you want just a plain black page with no grid lines on it at all, you can turn your grid. And sometimes you want to do this if you want to get a snapshot of your object and just your object without anything in the background, so purely visual effects, or if you're putting together a report or something. So you can get rid of all the grid lines over here, or if you turn it back on, so if it's blue, whatever's highlighted blue, that's on. You can turn your grid on with that. The next little tool is your snapping tool. Now you can snap to a bunch of different things. Right over here next to the grid, this is going to snap to your grid. So if you're snapping to your grid, let's say I'm drawing a bunch of line segments. See how these line segments are all kind of attached to the grid intersections here, and I'm not going to be able to draw something that's halfway through a grid square. It's going to snap right to the corners. So if it's off, you can see the line is not constrained to be anywhere. So it's not lined up with anything. It's not stuck to any corners. Sometimes you want to put something in kind of a random position, and you have to turn off your snap in order to have the freedom to move things to any position you want to. But if you want it lined up, you just turn your snap on, and you can have everything nice and lined up with one another. Okay, next to the grid is this little guy, and this will align your angles if it's on. So if it's highlighted blue, when you draw a line at an angle, it'll snap it to be exactly 30 degrees or 60 degrees or 90 degrees. If you pull up this little menu at the side, you can choose which angles to have it snap to. So that can be a really nice tool. Okay, here's the next little group of snapping tools, and this is snapping to objects. So if you've drawn a rectangle or a line and you want the next line to be right at the midpoint or right at the end of something or right at the center of it, you can turn all of these different snapping tools on. If you come over here and open up the full menu, you can select what is going to be pulled to the snapping tools, and you'll notice each one of these has a different shape next to it. So if your cursor turns into a square, that's going to give you an endpoint, or if your cursor turns into a triangle, that's telling you it's found the midpoint of a line, or a circle. So you can kind of get some information based on the shape of what your cursor is for these guys. And again, if you want it to snap, highlight it blue. If you don't want it to snap, just click on this and turn it gray. Okay, so all of the tools in this little bar down here do not open by default. There's a couple more hidden gems. If you come down here, there's 3 lines. You're going to click on this 3 lines, and it's going to open this big thing up. And what I want you to do is click on this tool next to coordinates. This is a really useful one. It's going to pull up some coordinates down here that tell you where your cursor is. There's dynamic input. That's another one that's useful that I'll talk about here in a little bit. So you can customize this bar down here by just clicking on the 3 lines and then selecting which tools you would like to show up in this little construction aids bar down here. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the dynamic input option that you can add in here. And this is something that you can add into your toolbar at the bottom, or you can just type in Dyne mode into your command line. -3 is off, mode of 3 is on. If your dynamic input is on, if this little guy is blue, what's going to happen is you're going to get another command line that shows up right next to your cursor. So it's going to follow your cursor around on your drawing area, and you're going to type commands in right next to your cursor. And the commands are a little bit different. So like, let's say we're going to draw a line. In dynamic input, your line is going to be drawn relative to your starting point. So if you haven't started anything yet, it'll start from the coordinate system, but then after you've started something, the new point is relative to your old point. So let's say you're trying to draw a 10 by 5 rectangle. So you're going to click on the first corner of that rectangle, and in dynamic input, your second corner is going to be at over 10 and up 5. So you're measuring it relative from that previous point. How that differs when dynamic input is off. So here's the situation where it's off, okay? If it's off, all of the coordinates you enter are going to be relative to your user coordinate system, so your UCS. So the first corner here would be at 2, 2. So I'm going over 2 and up 2 from my user coordinate system. And then with the dynamic mode off, my second coordinate is also going to be relative to my coordinate system. So I'm going to go 2 plus 10, 12, or I'm going to do 2 plus 5, 7. So instead of just going over 10 and up 5, I'm still entering coordinates relative to that original coordinate system. So you can see down here in the command line what I type in when my dynamic input is off. And sometimes it's easier to think of things relative to your previous point. Sometimes it's better to map everything out relative to your coordinate system. So this is something that I use a lot, at least. You turn it on and off just depending on what you're drawing and what it's easiest to figure out dimensions off of. Okay, just a recap of what we went through. So we started looking at the drawing area. You enter commands through the command line and by clicking on buttons up here in the ribbon. And remember that anything you click on in the ribbon, it's going to start filling in code in your command line. So you're always going to be just keep reading that command line. Keep checking back and reading the command line. We've got your snap and alignment and construction tools down here. We've got our model space and our layout space. We'll look at layouts later down here. We've got all of your open files up here, ViewCube, navigation bar. And know that it's going to take a lot of time to get used to all of this stuff. I tell people it's like learning how to play the piano. At first you start poking around with one finger, and then it takes hours and hours of practice to get used to all of the tools and how they're going to work. So it's going to take time. That's one of the things with this class is it's just going to take time, but it's not calculus. It shouldn't be stressful. So really put on some music, get some snack food out, kick your feet up, and try and have fun with it. And it is actually fun, and know that these new versions of this software are so much more user-friendly than what it used to be 5 or 10 years ago. So kind of enjoy how this software has progressed and know that even though it's going to be hard, it's not nearly as hard as it used to be. And use all of those little help features. Type in whatever you need help with. Hover your cursor over whatever tool you need to see how it works. There are tons and tons of YouTubes out there to help you through this stuff. So it's just the big problem with it is going to be time. You're going to have to spend some time just playing around with it. So hope you enjoy it, and I look forward to seeing what you create. We'll talk to you later.